Hello. I finished reading a novel which I absolutely loved, and so I'm so excited to talk about it, and it feels appropriate to share the love of a novel that I read today because it is Valentine's Day, and it actually has love in the title. So it is Love in the Big City by Sae-Yeon Park, translated from the Korean by Anton. And this is a novel which really faithfully represents modern gay life in a way that I don't often come across. And so I think that's a really exciting thing about it. It's the story of a young gay Korean man who is named Yun, and his experiences with his friends and his family and his relationships. Some of these are just hookups he has, and other are more naughty emotional relationships. He's struggling to complete his education and hold down a steady job. Many of his nights are spent out clubbing and drinking and chasing tricks on gay hookup apps. And in fact, on the first night when he leaves his compulsory military service, he says, "The only three things floating around in my mind were iced Americano, Kylie Minogue, and sex." He's overweight, and he's very aware of where he falls in the pecking order of a cruising culture really based on superficial physical attributes. His contemporaries have developed more stable relationships and jobs, but he's entirely unapologetic about chasing his desires and following his instincts, even if it leads to his own undoing. The structure of this novel is so satisfying, I think, in how it's divided into 4 parts, and each part begins in a particular moment of time. So you're immediately thrust into a pressing dilemma that Yun is facing, but then the story tunnels backwards to show how he got to this place. And this is quite clever because of the character's personality. It just sort of feels like sometimes he kind of falls into these situations, but it shows by using this structure the development of his character and how he got into this point because of the circumstances he lives under. There's also an unflinching, honest quality to his account, which can veer from the defiant to self-deprecating, and in fact sometimes it even verges on the maudlin. "Life had always been eager to fail my expectations, no matter how low I set them." And I know for some writers and some books, this can feel too self-pitying and can get quite annoying, but there's something quite endearing I find about the tone of this narration, which is just so honest. And it actually reminds me of 2 other writers that I also really love, and though they're very different writers from each other. One is Jean Rhys, who's most famous for writing Wide Sargasso Sea, but also wrote a string of novels about women that are kind of drifting around in this state of depression and had really unhealthy relationships. And the other one is Brontez Purnell, and I read his book 100 Boyfriends last year, which I also absolutely loved, and also is this unflinchingly honest portrayal of modern gay experience, and also importantly doesn't romanticize gay bodies. Like, and I think in a lot of gay fiction, there's this sense of gay bodies of this like perfect muscular figure and chiseled features. And I read one book once that just described the main character as looking like Jake Gyllenhaal all the time. But the characters in this and the characters in Love in the Big City are, you know, they have bodies which are overweight. They have scars. They have different attributes to their body which are, considered not perfect. And I think that's just so refreshing and a relief, to be honest. And with all of these writers, they all express this deep commitment to romantic and sexual pursuits, even though there's this sense that they will inevitably end in heartbreak and loneliness and failure. At one point, he asks, "Is love truly beautiful? To me, love is a thing you can't stop when you're caught up in it, a brief moment you can escape from only after it turns into the most hideous thing imaginable, when you distance yourself from it. This is the uncomfortable truth about love that I learned." And there's something about this bittersweet belief that I think is paradoxically life-affirming. Of course, there were parts of this novel that really made me want to slap the main character, because he has this mentality and he gets in these situations where he has a relationship with a ideologically driven man that has this internalized homophobia and who can't love him back, and he realizes that he can't love him back, but he continuously pursues him. And then he has another relationship with a man that is really sweetly devoted and responsible, but he pushes him away, and he gets himself in these situations and he realizes that he's making bad choices, and he's fully aware of this. My whole life was basically a series of not clever moves. So he has this infuriating behavior, but at the same time, I felt very endeared toward him and cared about him. And so it was especially alarming when he has unprotected sex at one point and he contracts HIV. And this is obviously very upsetting and alarming, but especially in South Korea during the time that he was writing about, and the limitations on medical treatment he could receive, and the stigma around it, and the fact that it was difficult to get work sometimes because he had to take medical exams, which would examine his blood, and so this is a constant source of stress for him. But he treats it in this way and handles it in this way, which he refers to his HIV positive status as his Kylie, and so he doesn't see it as totally life defeating, and so I think there's something very moving about this portrayal of the way that he incorporates it into his larger life. I found it really touching reading the translator's note at the end of this book, because Anton describes in this how strongly he identified with this character and this narrator's voice as a gay Korean man. And there are certainly many specific references to do with Korean culture and geographical references that I didn't quite get, and there's a whole discussion about this, about speaking formal Korean as opposed to informal Korean. But I certainly appreciated getting this insight into modern Korean culture, and there were so many more aspects of this book that I just identified with, because it possesses this homosexual mentality which I instantly recognized, and many other references and discussions that I just really related to. And it reminded me of how there was this nonfiction book also published last year called Gay Bar, which is a sort of survey of all these different gay bars in different regions and different countries, and how each of them have their own specific character and local population, but how they're really united under this very similar mentality of people that are struggling and dealing with different issues to do with modern gay life in quite a similar way. So I found that very life-affirming and wonderful to read about. And also, just like a note on the cover of this. It's this is when I showed this before, people were discussing like, what are those things on the cover? And of course, it's a packet of cigarettes, which is surrounded by blueberries. And this does get mentioned in the text, where Jan has this penchant for frozen blueberries, which his friend keeps for him in the freezer, and he loves just popping in his mouth. So overall, I just really appreciated this perspective and this narrator as he seeks pleasure and companionship while struggling with issues to do with marginalization and issues to do with self-esteem. And there is so much in it that I just found really relatable. So I'd love to know if you've also read this novel, or if you're interested in reading it now, and if you have any thoughts about it, or if you've read any other similar books that deal with modern life or relationships or love, or if there's any other just books that you've read recently that you have absolutely loved. I'd love to hear about that in the comments below. But thank you for watching. I hope you're doing well and have a wonderful Valentine's Day, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.